Good morning and welcome to our latest Automotive Aftermarket Industry webinar, Electrification of the Aftermarket. I am Mark Field and I will be hosting today's session on behalf of Messe Frankfurt and Automechanika Birmingham. Before we get into how today's session will run, I'd like to inform you that this webinar will be recorded. If you have technical difficulties seeing the screen or accessing audio, please be advised that the best browsers to use are Google Chrome or Firefox. There is technical support online at support.goto.com/webinar. So what we'll do today is we'll take 45 minutes for discussions, then we'll have some polls, which will be mixed in within the discussions. We'll have a 15-minute question and answers at the end, and please use the chat function throughout to ask your questions and we'll come back to them. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Quentin Hetet, General Manager of GiPA, Matt Cleevely of Cleevely EV, and Tom Denton, renowned automotive author. This session will focus on what decisions and developments are happening today, what they're accelerating, and the need for the aftermarket to step up their preparations for electric vehicles. As the industry enters a huge shift in the next generation of vehicle production to hybrid and fully electric vehicles, the expert panel will cover emissions targets, new sales trends, and what the impacts of that will be on the aftermarket, the suppliers, the motor factors, independent garages, and everyone responsible for the next 5 years and beyond. Each of our panel will share their experiences from across the industry. So if we're all ready, let's begin. Matt, I'm going to start with yourself if I can, and jump straight into it when we talk about removing the fear factor of electric vehicles. So I think it would be useful if you just gave us an insight and told us a little bit about your journey as an independent garage into EV.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the invitation and allowing me on today. But yeah, so my experience, I've spent 20 years in the aftermarket repairing all makes and models, joined my family business, and after 20 years or so, about 4 years ago, wanted to develop myself professionally. I've always been very environmentally thoughtful. I've got solar panels on my house, have done for a decade or so. I wanted to look at EV as potentially the next vehicle for me to personally own and to learn from. As soon as I purchased one, which wasn't a great buying experience, a little bit of using it made me realize how fantastic they are as cars, and why isn't everyone driving zero emissions with the kind of power that you have from an EV and the pleasure of the driving experience. I knew the answer. The buying experience I had was terrible from a main dealer. They don't understand it, and I thought, well, if this is the case, no one's going to make the switch over to EV because there isn't enough education out there. That's when I set up Cleevely EV 3.5 years ago. Cleevely EV is an EV promotional business first and foremost, and we offer workshop repairs and services, second-hand vehicle sales, which is something my family business has never done before. And we do educational pieces like this and to the public as well, just to help that progression into electric vehicles, because we are owners, users, and lovers of electric vehicles.
So when, Tom, if I can bring you in on that one in terms of that fear factor around electric vehicles, Matt is an example who had not a good buying experience. Obviously took a lot of ownership in terms of the sale of the vehicles, but also the service repair. That kind of takes that whole fear factor away, doesn't it, in terms of how he's invested in the market?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, one of the things about electric vehicles is that, I mean, I suppose I've made half the switch, as in that I've moved to a plug-in hybrid. But as we were chatting just before we started, I mean, I've spent the last 18 months running around almost for free because, like Matt, I've solar panels on my house and a spare battery somewhere else that charges and things like that. So these things are linked together. And I remember my own buying experience, like Matt was suggesting, when I went to buy my car. Within about 2 minutes, I realized that I knew much more about the car than the person that was trying to sell it to me. So there is work to do in that sort of area. So the kind of thing that Matt is doing, setting it up so people can sort of rent an electric car, get the experience of it. Because the main reason for me to switch just as a user, just as a driver, is exactly as Matt said. It's a much nicer car to drive. It's just so easy. And of course, the main reason, and I've said this before in presentations, but I have to admit the main reason I bought a plug-in electric car is so that when it's a really cold, frosty morning, I can press buttons on my phone and defrost the car, and then I can go out and watch my neighbour scraping ice off with a credit card. and it's worth the extra money for that, as far as I'm concerned.
When you think about the level that Matt's business went into, how difficult is it to get involved in EV as an independent garage? I mean, it doesn't obviously necessarily have to be to the extent that of Matt's experience, but is it a level playing field? Are the dealerships better connected than or better informed than the aftermarket? Because we want to talk about the electrification, and we're looking forward to a specific date in mind, which seems to scare us a bit. What's the reality of that?
I mean, my experience looking around the trade, as both a user of vehicles and as an expert in some of the technology, is that I'm finding places like Cleevely EV and others that are in the Hybrid and Electric Vehicle Association like network are often better informed at this stage than some of the main dealers. We do hear horror stories about main dealers wanting to change large components than the hope that it will fix. But I've found places like Matt's garage and workshop. It's definitely where I would choose to take my car for those sort of repairs, because it's a better option. And I mean, it's run by EV loving people, isn't it? That's the difference, because once you're a convert, it's a nice club to be in. But as you say about the level playing field, is it a level playing field out there? No, I don't think it is at the moment. I mean, we are in a funny state of transition, aren't we? I mean, I was kind of chatting with somebody the other day, and they were saying about, well, EVs won't do this and my petrol car will do that. The usual conversation that all of us have had lots of times. But actually, if you think where we are in the sort of historical development of the electric vehicle, we're still at early Ford Mondeo stage, aren't we? So give it a few years, and every day there's some new amazing kind of technological development. I mean, yes, some of them are a challenge at the moment, perhaps not as good as we'd like them to be, but the market is changing so quickly. It's a challenge to keep up, but it's not impossible to keep up for those that want to.
So, Matt, we're still at early adoption stage then. If you're an independent garage who is interested in getting involved in EV but hasn't yet undergone training or investment, we're still at a early adoption stage for the servicing.
Very much so. Yeah. And I think it's important that the independent garages out there, if they're not considering doing EV training, they really should. Even if, I mean, the argument I get thrown at me all the time by other independent garages, I don't see any. But we're just moving out, I think, of early adoption stage for ownership of EVs and into the starts of a mass adoption. And that curve is going to ramp up very, very quickly. And it's going to catch a lot of garages out where they're not actually prepared already. And the investment isn't huge. It doesn't have to be on a large scale. But one of the most important things I try and get across to other garages when they ask me about it is that not to sit back and wait for the work to come to you. We, as a company, are very active within the EV community, and we found that our key to being able to get in front of EV owners and to shout about our skill levels and the offering that we have. I don't think we'd have half as many customers as we do unless they knew that we were out there and doing what we're doing.
And that's an interesting point, and one that's stuck with us, I think, over the last 18 months is that the communication of a business, an independent garage, particularly on how we've become much more digital literate, we're able to promote the services and our expertise that little bit more easily. I mean, we are, as I said, finding ourselves on these platforms. We're finding ourselves as an industry much more comfortable. And as you said, if you can promote the fact that you're a viable alternative or an expert, it favours you.
Yeah, and the traditional family business is 60 years old next year. I didn't want to risk alienating my customer base that I'd worked from and we had generations of by suddenly turning around and saying we do EV now. There just be this fear factor where they think that we're forcing them into EV or that we're not prepared to look after their petrol or diesel car anymore. So for that reason, I've set up EV as a separate company to run alongside and to build up. I'm not suggesting that everyone do it, but I found it the easiest way for me to do it without scaring off our current customer base.
Okay, we'll come on to what you said about obviously mass adoption, but before we move on to the actual EV market, we're going to run a quick poll, if that's okay with everybody. And the poll is, which will hopefully flash up on your screen, are you interested in purchasing an EV when you next buy a car? So answers will be yes, no, not sure yet. So if you don't mind clicking one of those, and we will look at the results shortly. So again, question is, are you interested in driving an electric vehicle when you next buy a car? Please select one of the following. Which will be
don't
yes,
choose.
no, or not sure yet.
Well, it's no Tom's answer. I think I know anyway.
I tried to vote, but it won't let us panelists vote. But the answer is yes, Matt, definitely.
I thought that might be the case.
I just need to get some more value out of the existing car. You know how it works.
What have you got at the moment, Tom?
A Golf GTE plug-in hybrid.
Right, okay. Excellent. Okay,
driving it around with my oscilloscope connected to it yesterday. That's how I spend my day.
Right, okay. What we've got in the, actually, before we move on to the next slide, what I'll do is I will share the results with everybody. So we asked the question, would you be interested in buying an electric, are you interested in purchasing an electric vehicle the next time you have the opportunity to purchase a car? 55% of participants said yes, 18% said no, 27% not sure yet. Any surprises in that, Tom?
It's kind of about what I would expect and what I would hope, but I think what's most noticeable is if we'd done this same poll 1 year ago, I think it would have been quite different. I think there's been quite a big shift in attitude and thinking about, you know, EVs, and perhaps more people have had a chance to drive them and more have become available. So I'm rather heartened by that poll, to be honest, that people really are looking to make the change, and I promise them it'll be worth it.
Excellent. What we're going to do now is then look at the EV market, which kind of leads us into the EV aftermarket. But if we can introduce Quentin and just run through some of the stats and the data around the EV market, if that's okay, Quentin, in terms of where we are currently with the sales.
Of course, yes. Thank you very much, Mark. Yes, so at the moment, really, and that's completely linking with what Tom just said. The picture has completely changed in just a year. If you take into account just the UK for electrified vehicles, so everything from hybrid to plug-in hybrid and battery electric vehicles, they represent at the moment 40% of car sales in the UK, which is the highest if you take what I would call the EU5 zone, taking into account Germany, Spain, France, and Italy as well. 40% of all cars sold in the UK since 1st of January this year are either hybrid, plug-in hybrid, or electric vehicles. So it really gives you an idea of the take-up. The last year, 2020, finished at 29% of sales that were with such powertrain. So really, the growth is quite impressive. And I think, as Tom said, more people working from home and doing shorter distance. Everyone is actually rethinking about changing the type of vehicle they actually sell. So it's interesting. If you look at all those kind of countries altogether, you see it's 35% of them. And if you look at the growth rate compared to last year, it's plus 350%. So we are really in that booming, in that kind of booming take up. And Matt is, I think, completely right to say that we are leaving the early adopter phase to go into the mass market phase in the next couple of years. Really. So it's something important. I will add one thing that I think is very important for the audience to understand as well, because I see there is a lot of noise about this trend, but there are two things that are completely different: is the sales of vehicle and the car park. Okay, with 40% of sales in 2021 that are electrified vehicles, it doesn't mean that tomorrow by 1st January 2022, 40% of cars on the road are electrified vehicles. Okay, I think this is a very important notion to have in mind, and that unfortunately some people tend to be confused with. Okay, so this is also a key one to have in mind. I was running some. We have a forecast tool that we use internally, and that we use a lot to kind of update, because the market is changing so much. I had a little play with it this morning to kind of forecast the car park and how the car park is going to be in terms of powertrain type by 1st January 2024, which is not so far ago. So far away. and basically looking at trying different type of scenario and things like this. My personal opinion is that by 1st January 2024, the share of the car park, so overall population of cars driving in the UK road, will be between 11 and 13%. And when I say electric, I mean electrified vehicles, from hybrid to battery electric vehicles. So between 11 and 13% of cars, which means that we'll have at least 1 out of 10 cars on the road, if you pick one randomly, are going to be electrified. Sorry.
Sorry, Quentin, what was that percentage by 2024?
Between 11 and 13% of the car park.
Okay.
I wouldn't risk to do, but we probably will discuss that a bit later on. I wouldn't risk to tell you a number by 2030, because so much can happen by then that it's we might be flying by then. Who knows? So it's difficult to say.
Yeah, exactly that. And do you've seen, as the other panelists will have seen, and no doubt the audience will have seen, new entrants emerging on this landscape, some emerging and then disappearing?
For sure, yes, a lot. I think one thing that brought that electric vehicles and are bringing onto the market is definitely a lot of new entrants. The technological advantage, of companies of centuries-old companies like Ford and other very well implanted, very well-known vehicle manufacturer. What it has changed for them is that all they are the same level, technologically speaking, as their competition when it comes to electric vehicles and electric engine. So you see, indeed, a lot of new brands that were not here 15 years ago. I'm thinking obviously of Tesla, which is probably the big name around here. But if you look at the Chinese market and the number of new car brands, new OEMs that are emerging on the Chinese market, is very impressive. We could potentially, I'm sure we can find 10 names of brands that a lot of people don't know. I'll take one that is probably already known a bit, because it has had quite a roller coaster price on the stock exchange. Is NIO, NIO, that has been increasing a lot, introduced on the stock exchange last year, and has been impressively increasing in 2020. It's kind of a bit more up and down for 2021. But those kinds of company, they're starting from scratch. But so is any kind of traditional OEMs as well. Some of them started 15, 20 years ago, but still the the volume for those cars is only coming now. So in the end, everyone could potentially start, but it doesn't mean it's easy to do. Don't get me wrong; it's very complicated. It means a lot of funds. And if you look at a company like Dyson, who actually were thinking of investing in electric vehicles development, they actually decided to stop because I don't know all the reasons, but I guess one of them was probably the money that is involved behind that and the competitive landscape, which is really, really, really strong with a lot of new entrants having potentially the means to invest.
And Tom, if I could bring you in here now, and what Quentin said about 11 to 13% of EVs by 2024. We've seen today a big call for more gigafactories, for more charging points. Where are we on that currently? Are we obviously there's a big demand for it, so are we behind that curve? Are we, you know, in terms of the supply and demand of those types of thing? I mean, I know obviously UK PLC needs that kind of investment.
Yeah, I mean, it's great news, isn't it, that we might be looking at battery gigafactories, but I think the key here is that it perhaps needs to be plural. You know, that there's talk of a gigafactory being made, but you know, maybe we need more to keep up with Europe and the rest of the world. You know, charging infrastructure is interesting. I mean, there are some awful experiences out there, you know, with broken machines and all this sort of thing. But on the other hand, you know, I live next to one of the, just lucky, I guess, one of the new large sort of charging forecourts that have opened up. You know, and you can just turn up and there are sort of 40 different chargers all lined up that you can use and drop in and take a coffee while you're there and things like that. So these experiences and these sort of things are starting to be rolled out, but it's, to me, the charging infrastructure is a little bit kind of chicken and egg, isn't it? It's like, you know, people who are driving petrol cars want to see almost as many charge points as there are, you know, petrol pumps before they'll perhaps be willing to make the change. But on the other hand, there's no market for people to be putting all this infrastructure in until there are enough electric cars to build it, you know, to sort of make it financially viable. So I think there's some sort of government direction definitely needed here to sort of prime the market in some way. But you know, as I mean, Matt was sort of suggesting earlier on, as a, you know, a proper electric car driver, not like me, I'm only a half an electric car driver. You know, that with a little bit of planning and particular, as I know Matt does, being able to use the, you know, the Tesla network and things like that. These things do work. You know, you can have a journey. You have to perhaps plan it out a little bit before you go. But it's easy to forget sometimes that the reason we're changing to electric vehicles is because of a fairly serious climate crisis that we're in the middle of. You know, so to take some small pain that we have to perhaps plan our journey a little bit more and perhaps allow another hour or so for a longer journey and things like that, it's not so bad on the grand scheme of things, you know, if you bear in mind what's going on. And I think, didn't we hear, was it today or just yesterday or something, there's talk of Tesla opening up their kind of supercharger network to ordinary electric vehicles and things like that. And as we discussed briefly before we started, didn't we? We suspect that will be at a you know, some kind of premium price, but it's happening, isn't it? It's coming along. It's being there.
And Matt, I would assume that growth of the EV market can't come quick enough for your business.
I've actually been really surprised with how the growth has happened in the last 3.5 years. This for me was a 5-year project to get established for when EVs were largely used on the roads, but we're finding that it's happening a lot quicker than we ever imagined. So I mean, I've just seen an i3 drive past me into the workshop now. I've already serviced the Model X myself. We've got Zoes and Leaf here to be worked on as well. So we're in the last 18 months, 2 years, we've seen our workshop park change already, so that maybe about a third of our cars now through the workshop are a pure EV, which is fantastic. And this is after 3 years, and I can only imagine what it's going to be like in a couple of years' time. But sort of when it comes to infrastructure stuff, I got interviewed by a journalist from the Telegraph the other day, and I was just saying that there isn't really many reasons not to have an EV anymore. There are only excuses, and looking to and saying to the government that they've got to be the ones to put charging infrastructure in, again, baffles me. We didn't ask them to build petrol stations. Why are we asking them to put EV infrastructure in? That will be down to the private sector, and it will be every business owner's consideration as well, that they should be putting infrastructure in for their staff and doing their own bit to promote EV adoption within their workplace.
No, it's a good point. It's a good point. And I want to come on to working with EVs next. But just before we do that, we've got another poll. If we can bring that up, please, which will, if you don't mind, audience. And also, just before actually, we'll do the poll first. So how prepared are you and your business for an EV future? So we have a number of answers there, which is 100% ready. Well done you. 75% prepared, 50% there, 25% just considering it, or no, not necessarily interested. So how prepared are you and your business for an EV future? And thank you very much for taking part in these polls. Do also remember that you can post your questions to any of the panel through the chat function, and we will address those at the end. And we can see that we've got some great questions coming in. So I'm sure the panelists will be delighted to answer those. So yeah, I think we're just about done on this poll. So how prepared are you and your business for an EV future? And now I want to talk, certainly from an aftermarket point of view, about working with EVs. And Matt, I think I'll come to yourself first on this one, because when we talk about the EV market growing, yes, we can see that, but obviously the vehicle park is growing older. So as an independent garage, you have to be, again, as you've always been, multidisciplined. That's quite difficult, I guess, in some respects, because it requires investment. There's skills, and we've talked about these on other webinars, and we talk about them on Auto Resource. The level of investment, the training, the skills, the knowledge is immense now. And then the sort of backdrop of that is what we as an industry charge to the motorist. So what's the best way for garages to tackle this sort of multidisciplined vehicle park, with obviously new technology coming through the door like you're seeing in your garage?
I think commitment is one. They have to be committed to it. There's the obvious safety aspect of having high voltage training. Mine was done 4 years ago by an aftermarket provider, but it's still very relevant today in the fact that we're working with high voltages, and isolating those so that we can work on the vehicle safely is important. But by no means is it is what we do day in, day out. A large proportion of our work is servicing brakes, tires, suspension, things like that. And there's a lot of fear out there that, oh my God, the car's electric. The drivetrain is electric. The car is a car, and it can still be looked after. It can still be maintained. The technician will need to be knowledgeable, will need to be understanding of the potential risks involved with the drivetrain and things, but it doesn't mean that the car can't be worked on unless you've done a level 4. It can be at a service level. You just got to have a little bit of understanding. So our investment has largely been in time rather than equipment. We've got a few basic hand tools that are insulated, but it's more about investment in time, in learning what's out there, how it operates, what the dangers are, and as Tom pointed out earlier, things like the Hevet network that's there to support and provide technical information to the aftermarket independent sector has been an absolute invaluable resource for us, because you can't know everything about everything. You can't keep reading up and retain that information, or I certainly can't. So we find out what we need to know on a certain job at the point where we need to know it, and you're constantly learning, and that's the way that it's always been throughout my career. And I don't think it's going to change any point in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
And it's a good point, Tom, isn't it, that Matt makes in terms of EV vehicles not necessarily just being about high voltage and the fear factor around that.
Yeah, I mean the fear factor is kind of where we started, Mark, wasn't it? Really, and it's a good title because it can
Yep.
apply to, you know, customers have a fear factor about electric vehicles, but technicians and garage owners do as well. I've got the great advantage of being quite old. I think that's an advantage. I'm not quite sure, but what that means is that I can remember lots of technologies coming out in our motor trade. And, you know, let's think of a simple one. You know, when carburetors started to be replaced by some kind of fuel injection, you know, there was a fear factor around that. People were saying, oh, well, I'm just going to carry on with the old cars. You know, one of the sort of big ones was when lambda sensors and stoichiometric ratios became important, when catalytic converters were fitted to vehicles and things like that. And again, there's a massive fear factor around that. You know, will we be able to work on those vehicles? And well, and of course the answer is yes. And actually the shift to electric vehicles is potentially happening a little bit quicker because of you know, climate related reasons and things like that. But you know, as Matt says, it's still a car. It still needs the brakes sort of fixing, and the, you know, and the pollen filter changing, and the tires changing, and the suspension checking, and an MOT still needs to be done, and all of these sort of things. So, you know, I really hope we can encourage people not to be fearful of these things. And you know, even if you're not seeing EVs in the garage, I mean, seriously consider getting on a, you know, a course to sort of learn more about EVs. And on that particular subject, just to set a context here, you know, there are some really good aftermarket companies, as Matt suggested earlier on, doing training, offering IMI qualifications, which I think is important. And some of them now you can do kind of the equivalent of a day's training online. So you can spread out some training online and then turn up for sort of 1 day's worth of practical experience and assessment and things like that. And the point being, really, the moral of this story is that it's not a huge sort of investment to get that sort of thing working. And then people would at least know, you know, what sort of equipment you really do need and how much you have to spend. And actually, compared to some of the changes that have happened to vehicles, I don't see the change to electric vehicles as being a big expense in the equipment you needed. I mean, Matt suggested this earlier as well. I mean, you know, yes, you need to know how to use a suitable voltmeter and where to poke it and how to switch things on and off and things like that. But it's not that radically different from the changes that we've made before. And if I could just drop one more thing in while I'm kind of on this one, really, is the that I'd like to give a shout out to the IMI, really, is in relation to something called TechSafe, IMI TechSafe. I, along with Matt and plenty of other people, are already sort of on what we call the professional register with the IMI, where we, you know, show that we're keeping up to date with technologies and things like that, and get to wear a little badge on our shirts and nice things like that. But, you know, it's the right thing to do to keep up to date. And with IMI TechSafe, this is like an additional sort of tick in a box, if you like. It's sort of an homage, if you think of gas safe, you know, that people have to have a qualification to do gas repairs, is that you have to be qualified at level 2, level 3 or level 4, and you have to prove that you've carried out a certain CPD, continuing professional development, throughout a period of time, a certain number of hours over the years, which is not onerous, but it just shows that you're keeping up. I mean, you know, I effectively was on the same course with Matt when he did his training sort of 4 years ago, but we've all, you know, almost done more work than that since, Matt, haven't we? Sort of keeping up to date and learning about new things, you know, and I think that's important. And TechSafe is becoming a sort of a, you know, de facto license. You know, insurance companies are starting to say, you know, we need you to have this qualification or you won't be insured properly within your workshop. So it's becoming quite important.
I was going to say, I can't see the questions just yet, but I was thinking we're going to get a question which you've had before, which is, are we moving down that route towards self-certification, licensing? You know, I'm sure you'll get a question on that.
That's why I stirred it up, Mark, because I know that people like that subject.
Right. I shall keep the pot bubbling. Quentin, I'm just going to go up to the results of the poll where we asked about how prepared are you and your business for electric vehicles. And bear with me because obviously we've got two types of percentages here. So we've got 38%, which is the largest one, which is sort of just considering it. So they're not necessarily prepared. And then we've got over 40%, which are halfway there. So now, bearing in mind, we talk about electrification of the aftermarket, and that doesn't just mean obviously independent garages, but are you seeing part suppliers? Well, I know I'm seeing part suppliers and obviously manufacturers and also distributors, motor factors. They are also gearing up, aren't they, for an electric vehicle or an alternative vehicle future?
Yeah, definitely they are. The real question, and now that we again, I'll take that quote because it's a good one. The fact that we are moving to arriving to the end of that early adopter phase means that people that have been for a few years trying to figure out when is the fine spot, the sweet spot where we actually stock more parts and start to see that. That training being used into the workshop as well. I think this is really going to increase quite quickly in the coming I was about to say weeks, but months for sure. And more the supply chain and the way the supply chain is organized is going to be reflected. I think also what is important is that at the moment it's still a relatively small volume of parts, small volumes of components, and therefore the players that actually get into it now will definitely have an advantage, quite an important competitive advantage in a year or 2 years time when everyone is going to be okay. I need all those parts in stock. So creating the connection and everything is important. And it's important to do really straight away, even if the scale is not as big as it's going to be in the next 2 or 3 years. And the other thing I think, looking back at the working on EVs and the comment of Matt and Tom regarding a workshop gearing up, something else that is very, very important to have in mind, and for all the workshops that are listening to us, I think it's very important to keep that in mind. We are talking about the new entrant on the market. We are talking about NIO. We are talking about Tesla. These people, they never repaired the car before. So all their aftermarket operations are new, okay? And the aftermarket, the independent aftermarket, as well as the dealers, they have years and years of experience dealing with customer, repairing cars. Not necessarily the same methodology, but they have the expertise of repairing a car. And then it's just a methodology or technical update really to work on those powertrain. But when we were discussing earlier, Matt was telling us that his company is going to be to turn 60 years next year. That's amazing. That's so much experience, so much more experience than new entrants on the market. So I think when people think that, okay, but I'm a small independent garage, why should I do that, and so on, there are so much more money in the dealership next door or whatever. They actually have to start. They have to go into the same process, and no one is late yet. Okay, in 2 years' time, you might be late, but at the moment, it's really the good opportunity to kind of capitalize on all the experience they have from years and years of their business.
And as you said, hopefully, well, today we're starting to remove some of those boundaries that prevented people in the past. But I'm going to move on because it is a rarity. I am actually keeping to time quite well. But we're going to move to another poll, if that's okay. And before we look at the EV future, do you think the independent automotive aftermarket will perform better, worse, or the same 2030 onwards? So do you think the independent automotive aftermarket will perform better, worse, or the same 2030 onwards? Please submit your answers now, if that's okay. And thank you for the many questions that are coming in, which I'm going to go through the final section, and then we've got some great questions for all of our panelists, which are much appreciated, and they are really fantastic, and we do appreciate those. So just the last couple of results. Do you think the independent automotive aftermarket will perform better, worse, or the same from 2030 onwards? And if you can quickly look at see the screen, then you will see that, I don't know what the panelists think about this, but 39% said the same. 32% of attendees think that the aftermarket, independent automotive aftermarket, will perform worse than it currently is, and 28% are better. So any thoughts on that, Matt? We'll start with yourself.
I'm tempted to think straight away you sort of got a clear selection of optimists, pessimists, and realists. And the realism, as Tom pointed out, and I've been lucky enough throughout my career to see the witnessing of carburetors and going from points to electronic ignition and moving on and moving on and moving on, that it will probably be very much the same, that we will keep up. We will find a way because we're needed. The main dealers cannot keep up and be able to cope with looking after the pool of cars that are on the roads on their own. And the aftermarket and independent garages are absolutely vital for keeping people on the road and keeping the infrastructure moving.
I think it's a great point, and in the success of the independent aftermarket, we've always been able to evolve. We've always been able to meet the challenges, haven't we, Tom? And I guess the thing that we talk about the fear factors, and a question that we will probably get on from the audience, but 9 years, 2030, it's a long time, a relatively short time, depending on how you look at it. Our audience will look at it in separate ways, but we could be looking at something different to electric vehicles. That, we talk about hydrogen. Well, what else is coming over the synthetic fuels? What else could be having to look at as a sector?
I've just finished the next series of articles that are coming out on Auto Resource, where I've had one recently on electric vehicles and different aspects of them. The next one is about the dreaded autonomous vehicle subject, which, my personal view is that they're still a very long way away yet from having lots of these cars driving on the road. I mean, Quentin gave us some great figures earlier on about, the sales of electrified vehicles might be pushing 40%, but then the impact that has on the car park, of course, is much smaller, isn't it? And things like that. But I mean, I know we're primarily thinking about electrification in this particular webinar, aren't we? But the other things that are coming along, more complex advanced driver assistance systems, cyber security, communication, different things that are happening like that. I mean, maybe at some point we'll be moving much more into what we call V2X, vehicle connected to everything. So there's opportunities for the batteries within electric cars around the country to work as storage devices for when excess power is being generated and things like that. So we are in a time of great change, and more things are happening all the time. And I think, we've tried to imply, not incorrectly, that change is nothing new for us within the motor trade, is it? As Matt suggested, points take us back a bit and things like that. But the pace of change, I think, is kind of increasing a little at the moment, and it really is necessary to keep up. And I know I bang on about this a lot, but do get involved in the training when opportunities arrive. Keep up to date with different things. Doing training isn't an expense, it isn't a cost, it's an investment in the future, and it's a great way forward. We really have some absolutely cracking kind of trainers out there who are covering these things so that we're ready for what comes next.
Yeah, and we shouldn't be afraid. We should embrace.
That's my point, Mark. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to move into questions sort of on this topic really, and we've got one, Matt, which from the audience, and thank you for this, which was, given the higher weight of EVs, should independent garages be thinking more of replacement brakes, wheel bearings, shock absorbers for their future revenue streams?
We have found that certainly suspension ball joints and bushings wear out faster. Brakes is a different one because of the strength of regen on a lot of EVs. They don't actually wear down as much, but we are finding that we're doing a lot of brake work due to corrosion. The lack of brake use and the change of driving style to make the best of regenerative braking means that the brakes aren't being used, and therefore they will seize and or corrode up much further or much quicker than before they wear out at all. So the brakes is quite an interesting one. Tyres, yes, there's higher rates of tyre wear as well. So far from wanting to just be a fast fit though, and changing components like that, we're sort of looking very much towards how we can repair components. And we've, you were saying earlier about the aftermarket in regards to parts supply. There weren't enough of the parts that I needed when we were in the last few years when we've been moving into this repair. So we actually, I went out there and found a parts supplier that deals with aftermarket Tesla specific components,
right,
and actually import our own components, and have bypassed the buying groups and things like that and gone straight to source and bring them into the UK for not only our own use through our workshop, but for other garages that want to a supply of parts. And some of the heavier garages do actually use us as our parts supplier, as their parts supplier as well. So
okay,
yeah.
It's a fascinating, and I think some of the questions we're getting are still kind of based around that. What if this happens? Is this is a detriment to the aftermarket? And Quentin, we've had a question that says, should independents worry that OEMs will increase will use the growth of the electric vehicle market to increase their share of the aftermarket? I kind of think we might have answered that a little bit earlier on with the fact that it is perhaps more of a level playing field and garages can get involved. But is that something you're?
If we look at the situation as it is today, overall, all powertrain together. First of all, we had since 2016 decreasing volume of car sales since 2016. Last year was 2020 was the worst one for a particular reason, and this year we can see that the market is back up, if we can say that, but it's still 31% down its level of 2019. Okay, so at the moment at the end of May in the UK, we have sold since January, 1st of January, 31% less in volume of cars that we sold in 2019. What does it mean? Basically, it means that the car park is aging because it's not being renewed fast enough. Okay, so if you look at the overall picture, the opportunity for the aftermarket is much more on the independent garage side than it is on the dealer side. So first of all, when you look at this, and I see people that think by 2030 the market is going to be worse for independent garages, I don't completely agree, because there are actually a lot of opportunities which are just structural because of the market. So that's one point. The second one is the fact that those new technology, again, you go to the dealership next door to your garage, they probably haven't seen much more electric vehicles as yourself, as the garage, an independent garage. So the experience they have, yes, the OEMs are building those vehicles, but then their dealership, their network doesn't have much more experience than the independent garage when it comes to repair.
Yeah.
And Tom mentioned it, and I have as well various numbers of people with experience at dealerships level for their electric vehicles, and they actually didn't think necessarily it was the best offer they could find. Okay, so all of this together, I think there is structurally really a market that is in favor of the independent aftermarket. And if you add on top of this the opportunity that represents electrified vehicles, given that everyone is starting from zero, from scratch, I think there are actually more plus plus than minus minus for the independent garages by 2030. Of course, the OEMs are going to make it not necessarily easy, and that's I was about to say it's fair play. I don't know how fair play it is actually, but they're trying to keep their business as much as they can.
And this is a great point, Quentin. Thank you for that really full answer. And I think it lends us on to another question that actually I did ask, but I won't take the credit for because it was asked by the audience, Matt, which was, are you seeing issues in getting access to data from manufacturers? Because the person who has asked the question is saying that some of the body shops are seeing that they are having troubles getting repair data from manufacturers.
Yes, is the short answer, but I don't think that's any different because of electrification. I just think that's the state of the aftermarket, regardless of fuel type. Manufacturers are aware that the independents are taking a large piece of their cake, if you like, and they're doing what they can to try and stop that. But there are various data sourcing options, and we just try and utilize as many as we can to be able to locate what we need. But certainly from the Tesla side of things, because they don't have to, or they're not providing any aftermarket information at all, we're still able to find certain things out via the Hevet network and other resources that we have to us.
Okay,
so,
Tom, you agree with that?
I do. I mean, the bottom line is, as Matt said, this is nothing new, is it? You know, we've all come across new technologies in the past, and I mean, you know, we've just had to find our way through. I mean, arguably, in many ways, there are so many really good data suppliers at the moment, and of course, with block exemption and things like that, that we can go and access. You have to pay, of course, but go and access information directly from the manufacturer's sites and different things like that. Yeah, completely agree. There's nothing new here.
I guess it.
I was just about to say it's been I've been working with GiPA for 8-9 years now, and the first topic I worked on was block exemption rule review and a tender for the European Union, talking about a common platform for all vehicle data to be from the same place, so you have one subscription rather than a subscription per manufacturer or OEMs. And basically, it's been 8 years. It's still the same, and it's nothing new. It's just a bit of a challenge for sure. But it's not being enhanced by the arrival of new powertrain and electrified vehicles. It's just same story, unfortunately.
No, I think it's, as you said, it's an ongoing campaign for the automotive industry, and as I said, one that, as you have mentioned, there's lots of solutions out there, and I think if we continue to work together, it will be hopefully a more prosperous future for our industry. And looking at it the other side, Tom, we have a question which talks about what support do you feel the UK government needs to provide for the motorist to adopt and purchase an EV vehicle, knowing that the current cost differential between petrol, diesel and EV is large. I think last year, maybe in a result of the pandemic, but obviously majority of EVs were company cars. What can be done to sort of bring the motorist, because something wouldn't possibly, as we talk about the aging vehicle park, something's going to give, I would expect, in the future.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few points behind your question, or one of our colleagues who's asked the question here. First off, I think we still have the plug-in grant, don't we, up to about £2,500 or something is available, which tends to bring things down. I attended a few webinars, over the last few months with different vehicle manufacturers, and there seems to be a general feeling with new cars anyway, that the crossover point where electric vehicles become about the same price as the equivalent of petrol or diesel vehicle is about 2025, something like that. Now, Quentin might have more information on that one, but that's the general kind of feeling where it is. But I sometimes think people forget to compare like with like here. They think, they're driving around in a Vauxhall Astra or something and think, well, I'm thinking about making the move to an electric vehicle and perhaps better buy a Tesla or something. I mean, that's perhaps not normally the car that you would buy. So, you know, I'm pleased that the government are keeping the plug-in grant going, and that certainly helps sort of spark the market up a little bit, if you'll pardon the pun, doesn't it? And keep it going like that. But it's a question of becoming realistic as well about what we need. And again, I might defer this back to Quentin in a minute if he doesn't mind. But I wonder if the type of car that we buy is going to be changing. You know, a lot of journeys, certainly recently with COVID and all that kind of stuff, a lot of journeys I've done recently, it's just me in the car. I've done kind of 10 miles and I've come back. And, you know, do I need a £35,000 car in order to be able to do that? Or would some kind of, you know, £12,000–13,000 car that's much smaller, you know, has a very short range and things like that, work perfectly well in those situations? So, you know, it's very hard to compare like with like here, I think, and I suspect that the type of vehicles available to us will start to change. So I don't know, Quentin, if you want to come in on that one.
Yeah, I think if you look at the chart we show a couple of I was a couple of minutes, 20 minutes ago maybe, the UK is already the country with the most percentage of sales that are electrified anyway. So grants are definitely not as big as they might be in France or in Germany at the moment. However, in percentage of new car sales, we are still selling more electrified cars than in those countries. So I think those cars are being sold anyway. The grant is good. It's always helpful. It's always nice. But I mean, it doesn't stop people to buy those vehicles. So I think this is the first point. There is a real, I don't want to say a hype, but it's not only a hype. It's really a real adoption phase that is going on in the UK. That's definitely a fact. When it comes to the vehicles usage, I completely agree with you. And I think in the end, in 15 years' time, by the time that battery electric vehicles are actually something that is more common, the technology between one brand, one manufacturer and the other is not going to be very different. It's not like IC at the moment where transmission is a big thing for one company, while from the other company it's actually a bit weak and so on. We're going to have very standard engine that are going to be very similar across all the brands, and that are going to have relatively similar performance. And if you want to push even further the comparison, in 15 years time, you will be buying a car like you buy a pair of sneakers. It's a Nike, it's an Adidas. It depends the type of design you like, how you want your seats to be, and so on. But the function is going to be very simple. It's just the design you want and the lifestyle and the kind of marketing proposition that is behind that is going to make you decide between Vauxhall and Tesla or whoever really. So I really think that I'm really in line with you about this, Tom. I think it's going to be very standardized in the coming years and simple.
Can I interject? Because we've seen a lot of members of the public coming in and wanting to get their first EV, and very interested in technology. And when we've asked why they've come in, they're just very aware of the environmental reasons. It's something they've been looking to get onto for a while, and they just want their hand holding throughout the process. We very much talk with them about 95% of their vehicle use. Where do they go? How far do they go? What journeys do they make? And which is why you, Mark, said rightly earlier, we provide a Tesla Model S for those long distance EV journeys. If somebody wants to or needs to do a 200–300 mile journey, it's easier in a Tesla, but not everyone needs to own one. And something that I speak about a lot when I do the talks to community groups and things is what gets overlooked with EV ownership is TCO, total cost of ownership. That's the numbers that we should be looking at when comparing purchasing a new car. What's the total cost of ownership over the lifespan of this car? Not its initial purchase price. It's what's it going to cost. And with higher values of EVs and lower running costs and depreciation being less, an EV stacks up competitively and comparatively very quickly with any ICE vehicle on the road.
And it's a good point, and I think that where we are from what we've seen today, and with the huge amount of questions that we've been asked, is that there is an enthusiasm, I think, and I think there's an excitement as well in terms of what we can do as a sector in the independent aftermarket to help motorists, as we've done for generations as an industry. So unfortunately, we're just out of time. All the questions that we haven't answered, we will answer those, and we'll put them on the Auto Resource website. And that has been the end of our webinar. We've run out of time. I'd like to thank you all for joining our conversation today. A really big thanks for the questions. It has absolutely flown by. Hopefully as quick as this evening's football match will fly by. As I said, we'll continue to run these webinars quarterly. We'll share the feedback with the team. Thank you to the Auto Resource team behind the scenes that have been assisting myself and the panelists. Thank you to our speakers today. As always, your opinions and thoughts count for a very interesting and thought-provoking session. And I think we talk about early adoption. I think we are at a very early stage, as we have done already, in terms of our discussions on EV. So we'll, I no doubt we'll come back to this topic very soon. One last message from the Auto Resource team: the content on the website is growing daily. Do check it out with new blogs, technical briefs, products, promotions, and training. Again, it's a central platform for the aftermarket focused for aftermarket focused information. Do check it out at www.autoresource.co.uk, and do look out for our brand new digital review clickbook, which will be launched next week. Thank you to everybody, and have a fantastic day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.